We won't stop the killing. Every week of this trial, like every week of the past 7 years, will be measured by new Hiroshimas and by new lies, by the deaths and imprisonment of Americans, and by tens of thousands of new Indo-Chinese killed, wounded, or made homeless. We won't stop that. But this trial will inform the American public in ways that it's never heard before of how we've been governed in the past quarter century and what censorship and deception do to a democracy.
Okay, that was, of course, legendary whistleblower, my hero, Daniel Ellsberg, at the very top at a press conference after he was charged violating the Espionage Act back in the early 70s and other charges. And then, of course, The Third Man, which took place right at the outbreak of the Cold War, that movie. And you could see the tension in that movie, The Third Man, between the Russians, the Soviet Union at the time, and the French, the British, and the U.S. occupying Vienna, Austria. But that's for another day. I'm Randy Credico, by the way. This is Randy Credico, live on the fly here on the Progressive Radio Network with a very special Assange Countdown to Freedom. The gentleman you saw there or heard, that is, of course, Daniel Ellsberg, is my special guest. That's it. We've interviewed him 5 or 6 times before, but with other people. So this is the first time he's doing the whole show, and I'm really looking forward to this. By the way, I want to thank Kelly Lane, the engineer and the editor for Assange Countdown to Freedom, for that wonderful collage she put together at the top, and finding that little piece of business there from that press conference. So we're going to play just a 30-second break, and we'll be back with the legend, the great Daniel Ellsberg. Okay, we are back. I am Randy Credico. This is Randy Credico live on the fly on the Progressive Radio Network, Assange Countdown to Freedom. That was humoresque. And we are joined now by Daniel Ellsberg. And it really is a pleasure, although I have anxiety knowing that you're my only guest. I always try to play it safe with you and have other guests on too, because there's so much that you know and you can talk about, and it's intimidating a little bit to a guy like me after all these years in radio and podcasts and all that. So welcome, Daniel.
Glad to be here, Randy. Thank you.
It's great. I know. We started a few minutes late today, and I think I don't want to miss out talking about what happened, the reason why we started late, because I think it's important that people, I wasn't going to talk about him, but I just was a godsend that we are. So tell us.
Well, Randy, you know about this man because you were at his sentencing, I understand. But as I was trying to log on to your site here, I got a call. I assumed it was from you to say, what's going on? Are you late? And it was from the Illinois State Prison. A call would I accept from Daniel Hale. And of course, he's a great hero of mine. I've never met him, but we've talked on the prison line a couple of times already. So I had to get a message off to Randy that I'd be a little late. 15 minutes was the length of that call, and they cut him off directly just after we'd arranged to an address where I could send my own memoirs to him to read in prison. He's the heir, how do you say it, his great-great-great-grandfather, something like that, was Nathan Hale, who was extremely well known to all people of my youth in America, and I've been dismayed to find that he's not so familiar with the current generation. You can try that out, Randy, and see if they know who Nathan Hale was. Very well known for the statement as he was about to be hanged by the British. I regret I have but one life to give for my country. And the occasion for that was that he was being hanged as a spy and a traitor to the British Empire. He was caught as spying. He was George Washington's spy on the British forces. And there's a statue of him outside the CIA headquarters, actually, in McLean, as the first spy, American spy. But when he says, to die for my country, that country didn't really exist at that point. We declared independence, but we were fighting for that sovereign independence from the British Empire. And like every signer of the Declaration of Independence, Nathan Hale was a traitor to the British Empire. They had all been loyal subjects of the British Empire. They came a year or two earlier than this. They were all subject to be hanged, and several of them were hanged when they were caught by the British. So when I, 50 years ago, found myself being called traitor, I remember on one occasion I'm mentioning to the interviewer who said, how does it feel to be regarded as a traitor? A question I used to get quite a bit. I said, this country was founded by traitors, people who found a new loyalty to a country in which telling the truth to your countrymen was not sedition, was not treason. You couldn't be tried for traitor. In fact, that word applied to me by so many people, including, in effect, Nixon and his vice president, Agnew. I don't know if they were lawyers good enough to realize it constitutionally, but I wasn't charged with treason and couldn't be, because, as I say, telling the truth, as Daniel Hale did now, in a very exemplary fashion, is not treason. In fact, it had never been regarded as a crime before my trial. I was the first person prosecuted for it. And Randy, as you know, we have been very much protesting and trying to block the extradition and prosecution of Julian Assange. He would be the first journalist actually tried for on these same charges that I was. And clearly a violation of our First Amendment, freedom of speech and freedom of the press. Daniel Hale is one of the very best whistleblowers in the sense that he was talking about a current crime going on, not some historic one, and namely our assassination program with drones. And he revealed having been involved in that program and realized how wrongful it was, really, as a murder incorporated, more or less, that for every targeted person we illegally and without any due process decided to assassinate, 17 others on the average were killed. Bystanders, people who were just around, or people who were targeted wrongly. They weren't the person we were after. In other words, that it was a program that has made us the most hated nation in Pakistan, our supposed ally, precisely because the Pakistanis in the Northwest have had the experience of having an eye in the sky, possibly sentencing them to death on any given moment or day, just lingering up there with its Hellfire missiles, well-named missiles that kill people supposedly in a very targeted way, actually indiscriminately down there in actual effects. So for revealing that, Hale is in prison right now. It's a shame of our country.
Yeah, I did attend that trial with John Kiriakou, Thomas Drake, and Justin Radak, and others. And, he went up there, he got 48 months. And what he revealed was so important that this has been hidden from the American people, which I consider a crime, burying that stuff. I mean, it just happened again. In Syria, I think it was February 6th, there was a drone strike there and it killed a dozen children or so. And we don't know how often this is happening, only when somehow someone's able to get a report on it and disclose, the amount of collateral damage that was done. So it was a very heroic act. And here he is in prison, and the people who are committing these crimes are not in prison. No one's saying a thing. These are war crimes, as far as I'm concerned. We don't even have a declaration of war against Syria.
Yes. In terms of the war, these wars coming home, increasingly, of course, police forces all across the country are using drones. I think in Texas in particular on the border issues is using drones for surveillance and for picking people up. I believe it's only a matter of time before some of those drones are armed with lethal weaponry, as in Iraq and Afghanistan, Syria, as you say. And could before long be fully automated. Right now, the killing is done by people like Daniel Hale, thousands of miles from, that's where he got into the program, thousands of miles from the conflict, who are ordered to press the button at certain points. But these things can be fully automated. I think there was something of a revolt at Google, if I'm not mistaken, where they wanted to turn down a contract for fully automated, that would lead to fully automated drones, with no human kind of just deciding on an algorithm whether this person or a group of people deserve to be exterminated. And the world is probably going in that direction. It's a very, very sinister development, and we've led the way in that. But Hale was trying to expose it. I'd have to say that up till now, like a lot of whistleblowing, you can't perceive an effect. He took a risk of prison here for the chance of making a difference on an informed public, and there hasn't been the reaction, and as is typical in these cases in Congress and elsewhere, to defy this progress in technology and profits for the military-industrial complex.
And by the way, I just want to say, we're talking to Daniel Ellsberg, whistleblower, former lieutenant in the Marines from 54 to 57, a Harvard graduate, author of 3 books that I know of. We're going to talk about the Doomsday Machine soon, but also Secrets and Papers on the War. But that trial of, I think he pled out at the end, but that took place in Alexandria, Virginia. Same place where Kiriakou had to plea out, and Jeffrey Sterling had to plea out, because you just don't have a chance in that bailiwick. And this is the same place where Julian Assange, if he is extradited, will face the music in that courtroom. The thing is so rigged from top to bottom. Am I right?
That's true, yes. When you mentioned Kiriakou, here's a totally criminal program. Drones are so recent in technology that there aren't many, I don't know if there are any explicit laws governing them, certainly international. There should be eventually, and I hope there will be, but a much older program of torture goes back to human civilization, pretty much for thousands of years. And as a result of the Second World War, that has become more criminalized than almost any other act you can find. So when we had a program of torture in Iraq War, which was kept very secret from the American public, and still to a large extent is, our leaders, including our Secretary of State, our President, Condoleezza Rice, all the people who were involved in okaying this and even participating in, are clearly subject to being brought up against the International Criminal Court if we accepted its jurisdiction, which we're sort of in a challenging point right now, because we want Putin to be brought up in front of that court, but neither Russia nor America accepts the jurisdiction of the criminal court. So how we do that is not clear. But they were undertaking a program then that was not only banned in international law, in agreements that we have signed, but in our domestic law and in our Constitution. It couldn't be more criminal. One person has been prosecuted and gone to prison as a result of that widespread program, and that was John Kiriakou, who exposed it, who was the first to tell on television that we were, quote, torturing people, which they called, by the way, enhanced interrogation. It's wonderful. Madison Avenue, doesn't that sound like a sort of enhanced cornflakes, or enriched, improved, latest, and so forth? Enhanced interrogation, which is a very old process of torture. And he's the one for exposing a torturer in the prison. So, in short, when we talk about war crimes, which are being committed, no question about it, in Ukraine, you can see them on the screen, basically evidence of war crimes, it really exposes how selective our concern about international law is, because very few people were prosecuted for the same war crimes, similar war crimes in Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, other places against us. That's why we don't accept the jurisdiction of the criminal court. As a matter of fact, I believe there's a law that from Congress that says that we have a right to send armed troops into The Hague to rescue any American citizens. This sounds incredible. Who could believe this? But I think it is true. I'm pretty sure it is true that we say we have a right to take away anybody from that criminal court if it's an American who is alleged, who is charged or indicted with having committed war crimes. We don't accept that jurisdiction. So I would hope that I don't hope very much. I would have hoped years ago, but no longer, that the pictures and the television and the statements about the crimes committed in Ukraine would make Americans aware this is what happens on the ground from a bombing campaign, such as we have conducted in Iraq, absolutely illegally, as aggressively as Putin's aggression into Ukraine. And that doesn't make the aggression in Ukraine more acceptable or more legitimate. But maybe you can be aware of what this involves for the people on the ground. But no, I've learned that that's very unlikely that Americans will learn to apply that to our own wars as well. This is, after all, happening to white Christians on our screen that Americans identify with, Europeans. And when we bomb or torture brown, turbaned Muslims, can go on indefinitely.
Yeah, nobody seems to be concerned about what's happening in Yemen or what
Yeah,
happened.
Yemen, there's a perfect example. Yeah, going on right now at the same time.
Right now, Libya as well, 2011. You can go back and make a case for war crimes in Serbia, but only Serbians, maybe one Croatian was brought up in front of the ICC. But it's 55 straight days of bombing of Belgrade there, and a lot of civilians
Which
died.
Putin referred to in the separation. He justifies his, how is this? Let's see. Oh no, he sees Ukraine's sovereignty as a product of American manipulation, that we created that state, in effect. And he does refer to our splitting off Kosovo from Serbia or from former Yugoslavia as somehow justifying his efforts militarily to regain this country. It's not a real country, says Putin. It's really Russian. And indeed, on Monday, he may announce annexation of parts of Ukraine on this basis. So, okay. In short, I just read a quote, something to the effect, someone said that international law is like a spider's web to trap the weak, but the strong brush it away with a hand.
Well, why isn't the public in the media? Why didn't they focus on Iraq? Until we got Julian Assange and others who spoke out against it, but you didn't see anything from the media. And I want to, because we talked about Hale and what he exposed, and those are crimes against humanity, war crimes. And even though we don't have a declaration of war in any of these countries, I don't know how you define the difference between the two. I will just say they're crimes against humanity, all of it, but especially civilian dying. But here is what Julian Assange exposed, along with a lot more. But let's play this because I've seen it many times, but it's always, I want the public out there to see what he exposed. And this is collateral murder.
Bushmaster, Crazy Horse, we have individuals going to the scene, looks like possibly picking up bodies and weapons.
Let me engage you.
Hey, we need to stop that. We get down there. We need to stop that. You see my look?
Roger. Break. Crazy Horse 1A, request permission to engage individual.
Picking up the wounded. Yeah, we're trying to get permission to engage. Come on, let us shoot.
Bushmaster, Crazy Horse 1A.
We're taking him.
Bushmaster, Crazy Horse 1A.
This is Bushmaster 7. Go ahead.
Roger, we have a black SUV or bongo truck picking up the bodies. Request permission to engage.
Bushmaster 7, Roger. This is Bushmaster 7, Roger. Engage.
1A, engage. Clear.
Come on. Oh yeah, look at that, right through the windshield.
To me, I've seen it so many times, but it's always difficult to watch, and it is as shocking to me now as when I saw it the first time. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, Julian was criticized for giving that the title collateral murder instead of collateral damage or action or something like that. But what we were witnessing there was murder. Requesting cutting down, killing unarmed civilians, including injured men who were then shot to death afterwards. When there was actually American land forces within blocks that were soon on the scene that could have taken captive of anybody if there was a reason to. But instead, just shooting them down was clearly murder, a war crime. Not all killing in war is murder, but a lot of it is. And I knew that as a former platoon leader, company commander in the Marines, but in particular, in a job I didn't like that much, but as an assistant operations officer in 3rd Battalion, 2nd Marines. I was in charge of training at one point, including training in war crimes and laws of war. We didn't spend a lot of time on that, but enough to make it clear that cutting down, killing unarmed civilians, not threatening anybody, was murder. That was a war crime. And so it was very clear to me that as you could see it on that, and of course that's just part of it. I think ultimately there was an 18-minute version of that, and then I think there was a 28-minute version of that, which people should look at. Just look up on YouTube, collateral murder, and you'll see it. Well, Chelsea Manning went to prison 7.5 years out of a longer sentence for putting that out, giving it to Assange. It's the person who exposes it is the one who goes to prison. The people involved in no prosecutions, no investigations, as far as I know, of the known people in the helicopter who were joking about in a later part of the film, wounding, perhaps killing, I think, a couple of children who were there with their father, who was trying to rescue some of the unarmed wounded people on the pavement. And when they realized they had been shooting at children, they said, well, you shouldn't bring children into a war zone. In other words, a war zone is defined by a zone we're shooting people in from helicopters. And it was hard to get away from those in Iraq or Afghanistan. So I'd hoped again that, might reveal to people what we were doing over there. And certainly Chelsea Manning, that was her intention, to show that. I can't say that it affected operations very much, unfortunately. But it was worth her doing. Is that that noise?
No, I'm listening here.
That's sure. Another thing that Chelsea revealed to Assange was a process of torture, by the way. I didn't mention that, but a major thing she revealed was that we were turning over, in hundreds of cases, we were turning over people to the Iraqi armed forces, prisoners, to be tortured when we knew they would be tortured. Now, it so happens that in the laws on this, internationally and domestically, to fail to investigate and, if appropriate, to prosecute, indict and prosecute credible cases, allegations of torture, is itself a crime, like torture. And what Chelsea revealed was this was going on under the current president as well, that Obama was in this practice, which was clearly, by the way, what she revealed was that hundreds of, at least more than 100 cases where individuals, Americans in the process, had protested this or questioned it, even as she had to her officer, and had been told as she was, forget it, don't investigate, let it go. It was illegal instruction to do that because the law required that be investigated. So she was actually revealing crimes that reached right up to the current president, although it had been started before him. That was Obama. And I think that was not unrelated to the extreme sentences that she got. And the fact, by the way, that she was incommunicado from the time she was arrested to the time she got out of prison. No journalist was ever able to interview her during that whole time. And that's why I think, Ed Snowden, in order to explain to reporters what the information he was giving them meant in technical terms, which is not clear from just reading that material, in order to be able to explain that to people, he had to be out of the country. He took that example from Chelsea Manning's clear, as I say, incommunicado status in solitary confinement. And Julian Assange would be almost certainly up for that, would be into that if he came back here, just as he has been in prison, unable to be very, very, very limited contact with anybody. In my case, 50 years ago, I was out on bail. I was able to speak to universities, demonstrations, radio interviews, any kind of thing, as are other people who are indicted. But that would not have been true for Chelsea Manning or, as you say, any of these others, or Ed Snowden or Daniel Hale.
Yeah, I look back 50 years ago. I mean, after you revealed it, the Post and the New York Times revealed, the Pentagon Papers, and there was a lag time there before you were actually charged. And then looking back, how did you get out on bail? What's the difference between that period of time? And you explained it to us before, but can you encapsulate the difference, what advantage you had back then as opposed to the whistleblowers of today?
Well, look, when they first began looking for me, which I saw, and it so happens I was in a motel giving the papers to Ben Bagdiki, an editor of the Washington Post, after the Times had been enjoined for the first time in our history. So I was now giving them to the Washington Post. We spent an evening on that when he flew off to Washington. I looked on the television before going home. It was 7 a.m. I wasn't usually up that early to see the news that early. And my wife was with me, driving back. And we saw FBI agents at our front door, 10 Hilliard Street in Cambridge, knocking, a bunch of people around. So I couldn't go back. Had I gone back, by the way, we wouldn't have been able to distribute the papers, to the Pentagon Papers, to 17 other newspapers, which kept this process going and I think was crucial to the legal process here. So just to be brief about it, instead of going home, we went on with the help of some friends who to this day don't want to be identified, except for a couple. Gar Elprovitz finally, a couple of years ago, decided that we could use his name. And I wish I could tell the others and let them tell their story, but they still are worried about indictment. So with the help of them, we went to a variety of homes for the next 13 days, putting out more copies, as I say, to 17 other newspapers after the Times and the Post, one after another, so that they gave up, the government gave up trying to enjoin them after 4 injunctions, since it was clear, as one of them said, prosecutors said, it was like herding bees. They couldn't stop this. And I think that was crucial to the Supreme Court finding 6-3 that they couldn't enjoin this. Actually, they weren't able to, but it was moot because it was clear they couldn't stop it. And I think that had they been able to stop it, they would. But then they charged me, and well, I say I was charged and didn't come in right away because I had a few copies still to give. And my lawyers said, there's an order out for your arrest and you've got to come in. And I said, well, no, I've got several copies here. I've got to get those out. He said, well, you'll be a fugitive from justice. And I said, well, so be it. That's what I have to do. So they told the attorneys that I would come in on Monday. Attorney said, we can't do that, et cetera. They went through a process on that. So, and we did come in on Monday there. But on that occasion, let's see, I guess it was, I'm thinking, that was the first time I've been arrested, I guess. And so, I wasn't familiar with it. There was a huge herd of people at the courthouse to greet me. It was like an old program called This Is Your Life, when people from your past would be presented to you. Well, the Presbyterian minister who had married us was there. Noam Chomsky and Howard Zinn were there. Every friend I had in Cambridge, frankly, was in this large crowd. That was very nice. And we went into the courthouse. I've never gone into this story before, particularly, but since you asked, I had the impression that having done this massive act of civil disobedience, that it would be better to be in jail for a while. I've done it now, it's out, and we'd gotten all the papers out and done that. And now I should show that I was ready to go to jail, and I was eventually charged with a potential sentence of 115 years. But I thought it would be better to go in jail. So I almost courted that in the courthouse that day. And the judge, this is the answer to your question, did not want to put me in jail. Meaning, at this point in the war, there were a lot of people in the system who were very sympathetic to what I had done. And he did not want to put me in a jail. At one point, I remember, he said to my lawyers, will you take responsibility for his appearance in court or something? And I said, Your Honor, if I may say, I take responsibility for myself. No one takes responsibility for me. And I will be responsible. I thought, that'll get me in jail. No, he said, okay. He accepted that. And looking back on it, I don't know which would have been better, but that we walked out of there on our own recognizance. I don't think he set any bail, as I recall. Now, later, when the charges were raised from the initial 3 counts to 12 counts, worth 10 years each and 1 for 5 for conspiracy, they did set bail, $50,000 bail, for me to appear in court. But I didn't have to put it up. It was just if I didn't appear. So in short, I was treated very well by that side of the judicial, and for that matter, the FBI reported to the president that I had done this alone. As I said, the reason when I revealed myself in front of the courthouse, I said, I have done this on my own decision. No one else is responsible, et cetera, et cetera. I alone am subject to the consequences here. And Nixon couldn't believe that. He was sure there was a huge conspiracy here against him. And suspected some specific people who had not been involved for a long time afterwards. But the FBI did say on their investigation, no, he did this alone. I gave them credit for that later.
Wow, that's amazing. And then the charges were dropped.
Of course, I wasn't alone in the distribution. There, as I've said, I had a dozen people.
And you want to name some names?
In prison in order to do it. But in the copying, Tony Russo and I and 1 or 2 others were involved that they knew about. Yeah. But in terms of the decision to do it, that was mine alone.
Two great Leonards there, involved with Russo and with you. Leonard Bodine, I want to mention because, his daughter was a friend of mine and she just passed away.
The daughter of who?
Of Leonard Bodine.
Yes.
Kathy Bodine, who I visited many times up at Bedford Hills.
Well, she was a FBI most wanted at the time I first went to Bodine. I chose him in part because I thought with his daughter on the most wanted list, it would make him sympathetic to me as a defendant, actually, because his daughter, and it was several years before she was apprehended.
Leonard Bodine,
I never met her, though.
Leonard Weinglass was the attorney for Russo, I believe. His very last case before he died was my case when I had this
Really, I didn't know that.
very rare lawsuit against the state of New York about a ballot issue, and he won it. He died before the decision was rendered, but that was his last case, Leonard.
What was the decision? Sorry.
The decision was that it was this very complicated deal where I was running against Schumer, and I was on, and I was thrown off a Democratic Party line. Schumer challenged me. Then I was on two other ballot lines, and the Board of Elections said you can only be on one. Only a guy like Schumer can be on two or three. So we challenged that. I was on two ballot lines, and we had to go to one, and they gave him a temporary restraining order. But a year later, that law was changed. They had to change it where I could have then be on two or three ballot lines. And that was Lenny.
He was a very good lawyer. He was great.
Yeah. We're talking with the great Daniel Ellsberg. I want to talk now, getting back to Julian Assange in your case here. So at that point, there were a lot of people who were going to jail. You talk about that in that press conference up front. And there was a lot of people that were framed and, whether it be up there in the Lakotans, later on, Leonard Peltier, speaking of another Leonard, and the Chicago 8, they were originally convicted. And after that, after Bill Kunstler, I want to play, the reason I'm setting this up, because I want to play this. I know I played it for you before, but I want people just like Collateral Damage to know what the situation is now, because I think he was very prescient in what was going to happen that point forward. And this is Bill Kunstler after the Chicago 7, Chicago 8 trial. So if you'll bear with me and talk about it afterwards, give me your thoughts.
And that's the terrible myth of organized society, that everything that's done through the established system is legal. And that word has a powerful psychological impact. It makes people believe that there is an order to life and an order to a system, and that a person that goes through this order and is convicted has gotten all that is due him, and therefore society can turn its conscience off and look to other things and other times. And that's the terrible thing about these past trials, is that they have this aura of legitimacy, this aura of legality. I suspect that better men than the world has known, and more of them, have gone to their death through a legal system than through all the illegalities in the history of man. 6 million people in Europe during the Third Reich, legal. Sacco Vanzetti, quite legal. The Haymarket defendants, legal. The hundreds of rape trials throughout the South, where black men were condemned to death, all legal. Jesus, legal. Socrates, legal. And that is the kaleidoscopic nature of what we live through here and in other places. Because all tyrants learn that it is far better to do this thing through some semblance of legality than to do it without that pretense.
Well, there you go. Your thoughts about that as we look at all of these trials that are going on and the difficulty it is, going through the process, and it's all seems to be rigged and Kafka-esque. What do you make of what Bill said then and how it applies to today?
That's very, very powerful, what he said indeed. If we think of first of all, my understanding is that Republicans all over the country, in state after state, as well as in Congress, are preparing to steal the next election in 2024 if needed, if Trump doesn't get the votes, as he didn't last time. But this time, what failed to happen on January 6th, stealing the election, they want to make it legal, to make sure that they can actually restrict the votes or take away the electors from the voting process and give it to state legislatures, which may be Republican, and ensure their president get in. They are working to assure that will be legal. It will hardly be right. I would say, by the way, that back in 2000, when in effect the Supreme Court were deciding an election between Gore and George W. Bush, against the popular vote here, determining who would be the electors from Florida without counting all the votes in Florida, there should have been a general strike. And yet at that time, the aura of the Supreme Court was such that to say, well, it's legal if they say it has to be this way. No Supreme Court had made a decision like that before, but now that they've done it, what can you do? I think that was a mistaken judgment at that point. The Supreme Court was so clearly acting on a partisan basis at that point, as has just become obvious in recent cases, and of course with Roe versus Wade right now. So that was given the cloak of legality. George W. Bush, who of course a year and a half later or so was committing aggression in Iraq, first in Afghanistan and then in Iraq. And millions of people died in Iraq as a result of that, and have since, with no concern about legality. So another issue that he raised, as he said, virtually everything that the Nazis did after a state of emergency had been declared in 1933 was legal. They had an emergency clause in their constitution.
Article 82, I think.
Which we don't have. We don't have for emergency rule. But you know what the president was, Trump was almost surely, and we don't know yet, it'll come out, I think, from this commission pretty clearly, wanted to claim martial law, basically, which would enable him to postpone the counting of votes, change it around, basically. But why was he silent for hours while people were rampaging through a Capitol and yelling, "Hang Pence," his vice president? He wouldn't talk. I think he was waiting for the situation to evolve in such a way that he could declare martial law and do this. Now, in effect, then in Germany, after they declared this state of affairs, basically an emergency.
Right after the Reichstag fire, I believe.
After the Reichstag fire, things were legal. And the presumption of legality, or the state sovereignty, was on the side of the state as it persecuted people, and then as it committed aggression. Now, he mentioned, of course, the 6 million. I frankly, I've never heard that one described as legal, but it wasn't illegal under those conditions. It was kept quite secret, even from the German people and the rest of the world, while it was a huge secret, because they knew that it would be controversial, even though Hitler's regime regarded it as a necessary goal to purify the German nation and make it great, to make Germany great, get rid of the Jews. And but on the question of legality or just morality, here's a question, and now I want to connect this to what's going on right now, the possibility of nuclear war, a threat that Putin is making very salient. He's making first-use threats of nuclear weapons. And by the way, are those illegal, the threats? They should be. Actually, a great majority of the UN General Assembly has regarded threats of first use of initiative war as the ultimate crime, as a crime. But they don't make law. The U.S. voted against that, as did at that time the Soviet Union, a number of other nuclear states voted against it. But most states in the world have regarded that as criminal, but they don't make international law by themselves. Surely it should be criminal. In doing that, of course, Putin has joined the U.S., which has made these threats many times in specific crises, and it's the core of NATO. NATO is an alliance based, above all, on a commitment by the U.S. and an assurance by the U.S. that it will use its nuclear weapons if any member in Europe is attacked by conventional, non-nuclear means. We will initiate nuclear war. And that's the heart of this alliance, which I would say for Sweden to be joining that alliance, as they're in the process of trying to do, and will do almost surely in the next coming months, is shameful. To sign on to a commitment to initiate nuclear war. We're seeing from Putin how that threat is made, but we've done it many times before. Sweden should not be joining that. And here's the question, just on a moral basis, this escapes the question of legality. The deliberate decision to exterminate 6 million Jews and about 5 million or more non-Jews, Slavs, Gypsies, homosexuals, but especially Slavs, Poles, and Russians. About 11 million people, in short, has been regarded as kind of the utmost pole of immorality, obviously, for obvious reasons, evil. How do you compare that, or do you compare it to planning to kill 600 million people in some circumstances? As my book, The Doomsday Machine, opens with my discovery that the Joint Chiefs envisioned, if carrying out their plans, which exist today on the same scale as well as smaller scales, was to hit every city in Russia and China, along with many other, of course, which would cause killing not only of millions of people in Russia and China, but hundreds of millions, 325 million people in Russia and China, but 100 million in West Europe, our allies, just from fallout. 100 million in Finland, Sweden, Norway, neutral. Norway was not neutral. Austria, neutral, by fallout, radioactive fallout, and elsewhere in Asia, a total of 600 million people. Now, you can't easily compare. In fact, our mind cannot really comprehend humanly, I think, what it means to be planning and preparing and readying and alerting and rehearsing and making promises and assurance of killing what would in the end have been much more than that. Let's just billions of people, but keep it down to 600 million. Preparing to do that in certain circumstances of, say, a non-nuclear attack on West Berlin. How do you compare that with actually carrying out 6 million? Well, can you really say that the planning is less evil for 600 million than actually carrying out? It's hard to compare, but they are on the same basis. And that is what we've accepted. And by the way, what Sweden is about to put itself in a position inside the alliance from which it really can't effectively condemn or protest or criticize that plan. No plan has deserved more criticism ever, including the Holocaust, including Stalin's massacre of Ukrainians, by the way, in the early 30s, and then his purges later, or the Japanese in China. I would say that the NATO planning from its onset to initiate nuclear war on a broadest scale, if any attack, has been the most recklessly irresponsible, dangerous, insane plan in the history of humanity. And we're seeing it, threats based on that. As I say, Russia is now making the same threats, having built in imitation of ours after the Cuban Missile Crisis. They decided, well, we back down their situation, by the way, which has many similarities to the Ukraine crisis at this moment. But the Russians backed down, they say, because we didn't have a doomsday machine they didn't use that word, like the US. And so they wanted to have one. And they got one. So they now have the same ability to exterminate humanity as we do. And if this conflict could wake people up to those dangers, it would have some benefit, but it won't.
Everybody should read your book. The book is called The Doomsday Machine, written in 2017. You know, Henry Kissinger wrote a book, I think in 56, 57, about the viability of nuclear war. But Neville Shute wrote On the Beach around the same time and what the consequences of a nuclear war. It would spin out of control. There's no way to contain it. And let's be honest, it's just not going to be 20, 30, 40 nuclear weapons, which make Hiroshima and Nagasaki look like firecrackers, what we have today. Let's be honest, global warming is a threat, existential threat, but nothing. And I think it's seeping into our consciousness now as the threat, existential threat of a widespread nuclear conflict.
When you say existential threat, there's no question that the climate catastrophes from global warming that are coming now are an existential threat to civilization as it exists and the population as it exists. Really strangely, I have not found any estimate of what will happen to population globally. There's no question it will cause immense tides of emigration, and demographically, whole areas will be depopulated, and people will go elsewhere if they can afford to, or if they aren't kept out by walls and machine guns and whatnot, and wars that will result. So many people will die. How many is, to me, an interesting, a significant question, because I compare it to nuclear winter, where we can make pretty good calculations. We haven't told your audience, and they may not all realize that when I say that a nuclear war between Russia and the U.S. still involves hitting hundreds of military targets in cities and will burn those cities in firestorms. What we didn't learn when I was in the Pentagon in the 60s, we didn't learn until 1983, 30 years ago, that the smoke from those fires would be firestorms caused by nuclear weapons that will be lofted into the stratosphere where it won't rain out. That's only happened a handful of times in human history. We did it in Tokyo, March 9th, 1945, in Dresden, in Cologne, in Hamburg, not Cologne, actually, Hamburg. We tried to create a firestorm in Berlin, couldn't do it. But anyway, the firestorms, these intensely hot fires caused by these things, will lift the smoke into the stratosphere, where it will quickly envelop the globe and bring about conditions of winter all season round on the surface of the earth in the southern hemisphere as well as the north, and will kill all harvests. And there are stores of food in the world, perhaps about 60 days worth. And the countries that have those, including us, by the way, will stop all exports very quickly and will last months longer than the countries that rely on food imports. But within a year or two, nearly everyone will die. So that means it's not everybody, probably not extinction. Good news, right? But 99% or 90%. No, 90% leaves 800 million people. That's not a small number. Historically, we go down. But it means you can have a civilization, you can have cities eventually with that, organized society. But it means killing 7 billion people in a gruesome death by not only radioactivity, but by starvation. And That's a horror that we're preparing and planning to achieve if certain events occur. As I say, it used to be West Berlin. Putin is making those threats now about a place called Kaliningrad, which I think most of our listeners would not be able to identify any more than I could have a few years ago. It's a little enclave of Russia between Poland and Lithuania, separated from Poland, from Russia, which house nuclear capable weapons and probably nuclear warheads. In other words, it can't be defended any more than we could defend West Berlin, which was hundreds of kilometers inside East Germany. We couldn't defend that with conventional forces. So our ability to protect that always depended on our nuclear threats, which we made. And for the same reason, Putin has now declared any attack on Kaliningrad will be an attack on Russia. The only way he can protect that is the way we protected West Berlin. And he has their Iskander missiles, 9M729 missiles, which can be dual purpose, conventional or nuclear. The Baltic states, right next to Kaliningrad, believe that he has nuclears there right now. Hard to tell. With Sweden and Finland going in, he has said we'll base nuclear weapons in that area. Almost surely he means Kaliningrad, among others. Now, should the rest of the world be hostage to the question of whether Putin believes he's under attack or people there believe they're under attack in Kaliningrad, which you can find if you look it up on the web? I've never heard of it. The port used to be known as Königsberg, now Kaliningrad. Okay. What does it mean? Is it legal? Well, actually, most countries would say no, but they don't make international law by themselves. The Security Council, all of whose members, permanent members, are nuclear states. They say, oh yeah, perfectly legal, no problem there. They could make it in effect international law, but they don't, because they all make those threats themselves, except China. It's a permanent member, and China has a no first use policy, except it doesn't apply to Taiwan, which they regard as part of their own territory. So we can have a very hot nuclear crisis coming up, who knows when, in months or a few years, in Taiwan, where they try to take, they regard with a little greater basis, much greater basis, Taiwan as part of their sovereign territory, whereas Putin wants to say Ukraine is really part of Russia, although it's been recognized as an independent state for 30 years. So he's trying to recapture that, in effect. China has definitely said, if you recognize Taiwan, if the U.S. recognizes Taiwan, which we're moving toward doing very recklessly, we will invade. And there is an area where they could win a conventional war as of now. They've built up for that purpose for 20 years. So they're claiming, here we have Nancy Pelosi, Speaker of the House, planning to go to Taiwan, which is very like recognizing it as an independent country. And we're recognizing missions and visits and phone calls. Trump was the first president to take a phone call from the president of Taiwan. Now, as a congratulations when he won. What does that mean? He's getting phone calls from any other province of China, as China regards it. Very much like treating it as a head of state. And we're doing that at the clear risk of getting into war with China, in which our main protection or deterrence there is our threat of initiating nuclear war. We should not be initiating nuclear war. There, the threat would be from us, not from China, although they have the capability. The world should not be hostage to the question of whether we recognize Taiwan for the first time as an independent state and support their getting a permanent office at the UN. The world should not be depend on that, but it does. It does by our policy.
Well, we better start walking a very careful line here. The whole world should. And, I can't believe this hour went by so quickly. I'm just getting warmed up with you. I have a lot more to say. Why don't we say goodbye to the New York listeners right now and come back and have some final words? Can you stick around for a minute here?
Sure. No
Okay,
problem.
so I'm going to say goodbye to the New York listeners. We'll be right back with the great Daniel Ellsberg. Okay, that's a suite by Shostakovich. I run the risk of being censored for playing a Russian composer. You can't play Tchaikovsky, and they're banning Dostoevsky and Tolstoy.
Are you kidding? Wait, is that actually happening, or are you kidding?
No. Am I being banned? Am I going to be censored? People are being, they're burning books, or libraries are no longer offering Dostoevsky, and people aren't drinking Russian vodka. There's a very dangerous chill here. It reminds me of the 50s, the anti-overall. I mean, today is May 8th, and, Russia played a big part in winning the war against the Nazis. 75% of the Wehrmacht were stationed in the East, but how do they go from being our allies against the Germans to being what is now like maybe Germany in the 40s? That's the way we look at them, and all of the hatred. Is it over the top to you?
What you just said, I would not be able to believe about Dostoevsky or Tchaikovsky, except that I know that they have banned Russian cats from an international cat competition. Again, who would believe that? But major conductors in this country and conductor at the Metropolitan Opera, if I'm not mistaken, have been dismissed for what they won't say, for failing to condemn Putin in this case. That is a hysteria here, which is very, very condemnable, dangerous. It's like the First World War when we switched from calling sausages from Vienna sausages to hot dogs. I don't know if you know that. That's where hot dog came in. And remember, even in the Iraq War, they didn't want to have, what was it? French fries or something like freedom fries. It came out insane. And yet an aspect of mind control, which is trying to demonize not only Putin, of course, but Russia in general. What say did the Russian people have over this? No more than the Soviet citizens had over going into Afghanistan, or the U.S. Into going into Iraq. The Congress was lied to about that as to what was coming up. And of course, Vietnam, totally, where they were lied to every step of the way. So the effect of all of this in this war, indeed triggered by Putin's aggression, but an aggression that was risked and foreseen and I think encouraged by NATO, by the U.S. policy of trying to put this major part, what had been a major part of the USSR, into a hostile military alliance against Russia. Ukraine. Getting Ukraine in was, we were told, is increasing the risk of Russian military action of some sort against Ukraine, and yet we went ahead, just accepting the risk or wanting it. I think really there were people who were very happy that Putin fell into what so far they regard almost as an American trap. As a matter of fact, I just saw an article in Financial Times on the web, in which an industry spokesperson for the military industry said, Putin is the greatest salesman for F-35s there has ever been. And the fact is, this dog of a fighter bomber, which is plagued by 800 design flaws and is out of operation most of the time and is the most expensive military boondoggle in history, ultimately about $1.5 trillion, is being sold all over the place now because it's an American weapon. It's available now. And other weapons are being sold at a great rate. I think for the military-industrial complex, this war is beyond their wildest dreams in a way. But above all, it means a Cold War now, which are fanning. We have the fact of aggression here now by Putin, which, however that was brought about, but it's not excusable. But we are confirming now a splitting of the world into two parts, at least, can't trade with each other and whatnot. The chance of collaboration in order to bring down emissions and climate of CO2, of carbon dioxide, is, I think, out the window, we might say. I don't see any chance of the kind of collaboration, cooperation needed between China, Russia, India, the US on this now, and Europe, to bring down emissions. So that I think in 2030, where we're supposed to have cut emissions in half, that won't happen.
No.
And cutting them entirely by 2050, no. So we're the reaction to this, and is especially when we demonize the whole country for an action by Putin here, and more or less irrevocably for a considerable period, is dooming us to climatic catastrophe. And it also makes impossible changes in our military posture, which will reduce the danger of nuclear war. The our intercontinental ballistic missiles, are the trigger to the doomsday machine. They are vulnerable. They can operate at all only first, because if you wait for an enemy attack, they're vulnerable, they're gone. So they use them or lose them. Pressure on a president to react to a false alarm of the kind we've had a number of times on both sides is very great. So for a couple of years now, I've been focusing above all in eliminating our ICBMs, which have been anachronistic for over half a century from any point of view, military point of view, since we acquired submarines, which can't be targeted by the Soviets, and theirs can't be targeted by us. So there's no pressure to use them lest they be lost and so forth. We should have gotten rid of ICBMs half a century ago. Now we won't. There's no chance of getting them out of the budget. Northrop Grumman, with subcontractors of Lockheed and others, districts all over the country making parts of this. No, the hair trigger will remain on more of a hair trigger than before, with alerts on both sides eventually. So I think this situation and the way we're reacting to it, opposing negotiation to get it over with. I see no movement on our side, Washington, toward a negotiated solution of the kind Zelensky has been talking about for some time. He's in a different position from the American policy at this point, or Putin's policy at this point. Neither Putin or neither Moscow nor Washington at this point are going toward negotiation. But which is the only way to stop this war, and the risks that go with it, and the deaths that go with it. But no one in NATO, no one in the world really, even the Chinese, let's say, or the Indians, are really pressing and saying, get this killing stopped. Make concessions, if necessary, on both sides of a kind which can be specified pretty easily, what would be a realistic compromise here that would end the war. Well, but I don't see that happening.
All I see is a ramping up of the danger here with the $33 billion that the president is
right.
asking Congress for, which of course will be spread out to what Eisenhower called, and I know it's almost been a cliche, and people forget about it, or they downplay it, but he talked about it in 1960 as he was going out, 1961, that the acceleration here and the danger and the fact that this gambit of willing to risk by putting in Javelin missiles and expanding NATO to Finland and Sweden, they're not taking any responsibility here. And it was the same thing when NATO squelched any kind of negotiations between Croatia and Serbia.
Is that right? I've forgotten the details there, but I can believe that.
They did not want there to be negotiations. There was going to be between Kosovo and Serbia, but they killed the negotiations. Is it that the money is so great here and the power is so great to risk the destruction of the planet just to ascertain these riches?
Well, no one, I believe no one, what would it mean to be for an all-out war between Russia and China, or even a small nuclear war? I don't think that anybody really favors that, although there are people who talk about it. You mentioned Kissinger in the 50s. His book was for limited nuclear war between the U.S. and the Soviet Union. Limited. There were many things wrong with that then and now. The truth is that a war between the U.S. and Russia cannot be limited. Beyond one or two missiles, I can imagine Putin, they're saying, if he faces defeat, might gamble on a single warhead or one or two warheads and the other in hopes that the U.S. and NATO would back off. And that might happen. It would be better than all-out response. What is the response? Well, another response would be matching it tit for tat. We made plans for that. But then they double that and they go on to, unless it stops right away, which is very unlikely, but possible, then blowing up most of humanity follows. And obviously, Putin is threatening that. The U.S. is not doing what I would like to see them do right now, not impossible, and say, we will, after all, not initiate the use of nuclear weapons under any circumstances here in Ukraine. Seems not so unrealistic thing to say, but the U.S. the presidents have always refused to make that commitment. And as Trump put it, you've got to keep it on the board. And Hillary Clinton said exactly the same. And Biden is keeping it on the board. He will not say no first use. I would say this is the time to say that and to challenge the Russians and put the heat on them. Stop these threats you are making. Join us for the first time. And join China in saying, no first use of nuclear weapons. We will not initiate the use of nuclear weapons under any circumstances. Now, he's making that threat for the same reason we made it in the past, because he thinks it will be to the advantage of his conventional operations in Ukraine to threaten that if we, threaten him with loss, he may blow the world up. And that threat may work, as it has in the past. It saved West Berlin for half a century, which the Russians could easily have walked in. But we threatened to blow the world up, and the Russians didn't do it. Isn't that wonderful? The cost of that was, A, it could have blown up, and B, it meant the creation on both sides of a doomsday machine to back up those threats. So this would be the time to say, okay, we won't do it. And they say, but you've been doing it for half a century. Well, it's wrong. In fact, I see one positive thing in all this. It's so tiny, but it does exist. When we hear Putin making those threats, it could wake up people to how bad they are. When we made those threats in the past, well, it's America. We're the good guys. It must be a good reason for it. We got to trust our leaders and so forth. So we let them make those threats. Now, if we see the threat coming at us, maybe people say, not a good idea for humanity after all. And the same, You can imagine the same happening with atrocities in Bucha and so forth by the Russians. We've done atrocities like that in Vietnam, in Iraq, in Afghanistan. We didn't see them on television. But when you see these on television, maybe conceivably you could say, not good, not a good idea, very bad. Anyway, on the first use, I can't imagine pressure for people to join China, even add Taiwan to the no initiation of nuclear war. The sole purpose of nuclear weapons is to deter nuclear attack, and for that you do not need and you are not justified in having the thousands of weapons that the US has and the Russia has, or even the several hundred weapons that other countries have. To deter nuclear attack does not take hundreds of weapons. And everybody except North Korea, if they have weapons at all, the other 8 have more than that. Israel is a question, do they have only 80? I don't believe that. I think with Vanuatu, who revealed, spent, 17 years in prison as a result, that they had a lot more than that. But all of these countries can kill billions of people by their effects on smoke and climate. No country has a right to have that threat to the rest of the people in the world. No country. But above all, the US and Russia, with their thousands of weapons, which would certainly give you nuclear winter if that were carried out. So this might be the time to say, okay, Putin, you have no right to raise that threat, nor do we. And it's time for us to get rid of it.
You know, it's changing of the times is the fact that we are talking about this for 40 minutes about I didn't have these conversations 3 years ago, 2 years ago. I knew
it has raised the issue. It has raised the issue for the first time in years.
But your book, if people want to read your book, it's called The Doomsday Machine by Daniel Ellsberg. You should go get it because he wrote about this 5 years ago, and I think everyone needs to read that book. Daniel Ellsberg, we just got a few minutes left here. Thank you for enlightening us on this very ominous prospect of nuclear winter and the threat to the end of the world. But let's close out. This is the Launch Countdown to Freedom. What do you see? Give us your analysis of how we can extricate him, and why is the West so bent on keeping him locked down and shut up?
Well, the way this has developed, with the focus on actual war crimes, not the first, but they are actual war crimes, and the actual aggression, it's very hard to see changing or avoiding this element of Cold War return, which has returned, and which stands right in the way of reducing nuclear dangers ever and of averting climate catastrophe. Everyone in our place can try to avoid inflaming that division of the world by these total demonization of anything Russian, as you say now, or of, and by the way, calling this genocide and calling it Putin a war criminal, we're going to prosecute him and we want regime change. That's Biden. It would seem as though he's trying to rule out any negotiation. Very hard to think of negotiating with somebody you were promising to prosecute after the war. Is he really going to be prosecuted? No, any more than we are. You're not going to be brought before International Criminal Court, nor is Biden, nor is George W. Bush, who deserved it as much as anybody ever has. No, because that's not going to happen. But saying that that's our aim, and our aim is regime change, seems designed to block a negotiated outcome. So we can protest that and try to change that, and become aware of the costs we pay for splitting the world into two like this. Actually, I'm going to be speaking to Scandinavian radio and television a number of times in the next week, I've been asked. And I want to make the point that Sweden should not. They're going to join NATO, almost certainly. But there is a possibility here. There will be years before NATO could actually protect them, because months, I should say, because it takes a while to get that Article 5 promise of mutual commitment into effect. All 30 countries have to agree to it. So I read just yesterday that in the interim, said the head of NATO, the Secretary General, they will be protected by alliances with individual countries, not by NATO, but they can make alliances, from one day to the next on mutual defense. Those alliances don't have to be based on a threat of nuclear weapons, as NATO is, irrevocably. Those alliances that Sweden could make, if they need alliances, and they feel they do now in the face of their neighbor, Russia's aggression here, if they need alliances, those alliances don't have to be based on nuclear threats. They could rule out. They could be no first-use alliances. Germany might be very well open to that. Almost under Merkel, almost surely they would have been. I don't know now. In other words, we're allied in defense. We're not basing it on a threat to nuclear. That should never have been the case. Sweden could actually make those. I'm going to make the point for what it's worth. They could make those alliances right now and stay with them. There's no extra advantage in joining NATO except one. Their fighter bomber, Gripen, much more reliable than the F-35, would now become more marketable in NATO as a NATO weapon. And that word is used by Saab, S-A-A-B, that makes the Gripen. This product will become more marketable, just like the F-35. Well, that's not worth joining a nuclear alliance. So anyway, in other words, this is the way the world could go. A last thing here, if I may, Randy, I'm thinking back to your opening statement. You reminded people that they were hearing the music from The Third Man. Now, most of your listeners, if they're a lot younger than I am, may not remember The Third Man movie with Orson Welles and Joseph Cotton, black and white movie about the early days of the Cold War, back in the 40s, late 40s, in Berlin. And divided then, Berlin. Very few people would know, and I don't go into detail in my book, The Doomsday Machine, wasn't room for it, the following anecdote. It occurs to me that 1948, the Berlin blockade, when the Russians, for reasons that in retrospect were not so unreasonable, anyway, they did blockade Berlin, which looked very bad, and it was bad. But we were able to supply it with air power, with coal even brought in by planes, and food and so forth, for almost a year, and the blockade was ended. That was the first use of our nuclear weapons, the way Putin is using nuclear weapons now, threat of first use, because they could have stopped our air power very easily. Berlin was inside East Germany. They could have blockaded from the air or stopped our air power. They didn't, for fear of our nuclear weapons. Success. Now, we had only a handful of nuclear weapons at that time, although people didn't know that. But Truman didn't know that. He sent nuclear bombers, the kind that dropped the bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the B-29, were very ostentatiously sent over to Britain for the first time. Our nuclear bomber. We even sent over Curtis LeMay, who had been in charge of dropping the bomb, making a clear-cut threat. If you stop, if you tighten that blockade to the point of keeping our air out, you're risking nuclear war. It was totally a bluff. The B-29s we sent over had not been modified to drop the bomb yet. You had to make special provisions with such a heavy thing. Later, they sent over that possibility. We didn't have the bombs there. They didn't have. It was a bluff, but it worked. And Eisenhower and Truman. This is Truman now. Truman, Atchison, the others said, "Wow, we got our way there against hugely superior conventional forces by this threat." That was the first use of that after Hiroshima.
Wow.
As a threat. And it was the basis for what followed. We say, okay, nuclear threats are the way to assure that the U.S. is predominant in Europe. We alone provide this protection of threatening to blow the world up if with our nuclear weapons. The French actually have nuclear weapons, but they don't promise to use them if Germany is attacked. But the U.S. does. And the effect would be the same, French or U.S. or the British. Everything goes, pretty much. But we're regarded as the most credible because we've been doing it for 70 years. Yes, I'm saying this is the time now to free the world from that real threat.
Wow. We've been talking to Daniel Ellsberg, whistleblower, author of at least 3 books that I know of.
Okay, another thing that made me laugh, Freddie.
Secrets and the Doomsday Machine. Always fascinating to have conversations, dialogues with you. And I do recommend at this point, very timely, the Doomsday Machine. Get that. Just look for it online. And don't go away. I want to say goodbye to you, but we're going to just play out a little bit, go out. This is Randy Credico, by the way. We've been talking with Daniel Ellsberg, Lieutenant Daniel Ellsberg, author, whistleblower, really a great American, a real patriot, the ones that Thomas Paine envisioned. You're the person he was thinking of. We're going to go out here with another great person of the world like you, and that is Niels Melzer, who, by the way, I don't know if you know this, is a wonderful pianist, and this is his own composition called "Letting Go," and it's him around 3 statues. I think we'll see. It's Chelsea Manning, it's Snowden, and one other, which would be Julian Assange.
The rapporteur from UN on
yes,
torture.
This is him playing the piano. And we'll be right back just to say goodbye to you. All right, but this is how we're ending the recording, so don't go anywhere.